Good morning, people. How are we today? We are back in the shed. Hopefully the crazy weather and the crazy times are behind us, and we can get through the rest of this kind of blue digging that we are trying to get into. I am Andrew Goforth. This is Shane Pruitt. We are live from the shed in Spartanburg County.
We almost ended up kind of dead.
for Don't Bump the Needle, and our third episode of Kind of Blue. How are we today, Mr. Pruitt?
Man, I am doing fantastic.
Good to hear. Good to hear. It's
Fantabulous.
Monday. Monday's a good day to be fantastic on. I agree. If you can't be fantastic on Monday,
That's right.
your rest of the week's probably not going to be fantastic.
As my mother says, if you can't be good at it.
Or be good at trying.
Exactly. I mean, take it till you make it, baby.
Yeah, so this is episode 3, featuring Kind of Blue. The first episode, we sort of talked about the album and introduced a gentleman by the name of Bill Evans. The second episode, we talked about Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane. This is the third one. We're going to cover a bit more ground in this one because some of these guys didn't have play as major of a role in the album. But we're going to try to talk about the bass player Paul Chambers, the drummer Jimmy Cobb, the keyboard player who played on one tune, a gentleman by the name of Wynton Kelly, and then the guy who was sort of the inspiration for all of this music, who really gets very little credit at all.
I never had heard of him until we started researching this.
Yeah,
unfortunately, I haven't.
And he seems to be a pretty amazing person, and his name is George Russell.
Not only on this project, but he got his fingerprints on a lot of things in the jazz world from that time period, you know.
Yeah, it is, and you know,
behind the scenes.
Yeah, and we could go ahead and start with George Russell if we want to, you know, because he is sort of the key and the
hub,
the catalyst for what this album became, and this idea of modal music, and he is an interesting character. He was born in 1923 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he is one of the jazz musicians who actually lived a pretty long life.
He did.
He didn't pass until July 7th, 2009.
He was, well, I ain't gonna say that. Anyway, I was gonna say he was a smart guy out of the States. You know, I mean, you think about it, you know, for what he went through.
Yeah, and he lived an interesting life. You know, he was actually born, his father was a white man, and his mother was a black lady.
You know, he held on all kinds of sides.
But he was adopted at a very early age by Bessie and Joseph Russell, who were African Americans, and he spent a lot of his time in the African American church, particularly the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and that was sort of where he got his introduction to music, was singing in the church choir.
I think most black folks do, honestly, man. Especially anywhere on the East Coast. I think that's where they're introduced to it at. You know, it's you know, they get in there and play instruments and, you know, play anything, and they're like, all right, I'm tired of this one. Let me go play. Let me get yours. You know, and the next thing you know, they're playing 10 different instruments. You know.
Yeah, and he you know, his father was actually a music educator at Oberlin College. So you know, he comes from
prestigious school.
He comes from a musical background, and you know, just like the rest of these guys, showed a real proclivity for music at a very early age.
That's pretty interesting too. You think about it. I just now thought about that. All right, so you got George Russell, you got Miles Davis, and you have
Bill Evans.
Cannonball Adderley. Both all their parents were educators, or either, you know, higher echelon in society people. You know, you think about that. It's pretty interesting. you
Yeah.
know, for the African American community.
Well, and I think
You know,
it's
at that time.
Well, and I think
especially.
it also speaks a lot about where the music can come from. You
Uh-huh.
know, we often, I think, in our minds, create these pictures of music having to come, or any art form having to
Yeah.
come from this,
That's Hollywood that does that to us.
you know, this back alley broke
Mhm.
down
It's Hollywood
stuff. You know, and that's not actually true. You know, a lot of these people came from
Pretty
upper middle class,
affluent,
affluent,
Yeah.
you know, families and communities, and George Russell was one of those, you know, and you know, his father was, you know, a professor at Oberlin College.
Mhm.
That's a, you know, considering the time period and the fact that he was a black man,
Yeah.
that's a pretty prestigious to be in.
Yeah, that's like it's like Wofford is around here almost, you know, as far as, it's a little different, but it's definitely that kind of prestigious school.
Yeah, so George Russell, you know, he was introduced to music early, like I said, through the church. And then in the early 40s, he decided to move to New York City. And that was where he began hanging out with a group of young innovators that included, you know, people like Miles Davis and Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm. Gil Evans.
And Gil Evans. And, you know, these guys who were looking for a different approach
Yeah, they had a different sound in their head.
to the music, you know, and that's where I read a quote out there somewhere where he heard Miles. I don't want to misquote it, so I'm not going to directly quote it, but Miles was essentially fussing, you know, about all these people were presenting him with this music, and the chords were just getting more and more complicated.
Yeah, it's
and
too
Miles
loud.
was like, you know, I can't even play these chords, you know,
Yeah.
and was getting frustrated with the constraint
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
construction that the chords were putting on the music.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of flipped this switch in George Russell's mind, and he began, you know, thinking about, you know, ways to reconstruct what we think of as music, particularly chord-based music.
Yeah, because this whole album's based off of playing over the modes.
Yeah.
Instead of it being chord patterns, it's modal patterns.
It's modal patterns, yeah. And
pretty interesting.
it's really interesting because George got sick in 1945 and 46 and got tuberculosis and had to spend quite a lengthy period of time in the hospital.
Had a lot of time on his hands.
Had a lot of times on his hands, but this was
It didn't
when
stop him though.
no, and this is when he began to put together the book that we mentioned in one of the earlier videos, which was the Lydian Chromatic Concept of Tonal Organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fancy title. I got to give him that. But you know, this book was published in 1953. And at the time, this trips me out. In 1953, when this book was published, George Russell was working as a sales clerk at Macy's.
Wow.
You know, here's this guy who has literally
A genius.
reinvented the way that we approach music.
Would you like some perfume with that, huh?
Yeah, and he's peddling perfume at Macy's.
Oh God.
You know, and
Truth is stranger than fiction.
and this book became the foundation and was so crucial to what modal jazz was and what it became. And without him, you know, the music of Miles and the music of Coltrane
Wouldn't
it
have
wouldn't have been the same. You know, something would have happened,
Not like-
but it
not
wouldn't have
this way.
happened in the format that it happened, in the way that it happened.
That's the truth.
And he is actually the one who introduced Bill Evans
Mm-hmm.
to Miles Davis.
Yep. He was playing with George in some bands, and he obviously heard something in Bill that made him go, "Hey Miles, man, check this cat out." You know.
Yeah, yeah, and
This is the guy you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I'm fascinated with this guy, and this is a guy that I'm going to actually do some more research on because he lived a very, you know, this was a mixed race guy. You know, his father was, like I said, his father was white and his mother was African American. So you know, those are hard shoes to walk in, particularly during this time period.
Yeah, because white
In this
culture
country.
won't accept you, and then you know, black culture they do. They end up taking the children in. They always have for whatever reason. It seems to me that they've you know, the mixed race children. You know, thank God somebody does. You know, because children, you know, they're just children coming into this world. You know.
But one of the interesting things that I found out about George Russell is that in 1964, because of how volatile the race relationships were in the U.S., he just was so disgruntled and so fed up
He
with
did,
it
yeah.
that he moved to Scandinavia and spent, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years in Scandinavia, and began working with these musicians over there and developed like this whole group of people, jazz musicians that became quite known in the world
Illustrious-
of jazz.
illustrious in their own way.
And you know, there's a list of people that he influenced while he was over in that part of the world, doing his own thing,
Mhm.
because he was just so disgruntled with what was going on in this country.
And he just took his fire with him, man, wherever he went, man. It sounds like, it's almost like, I got this coal here that's really hot. Here you go, people. This is the right one to give it to. Boom, he just did that all throughout his whole life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he seemed to be able to identify
He knew what
in
yeah,
people,
that's right.
you know, the things,
Abstract things to
yeah,
bestow upon.
the
you know?
things that were required to understand
On a-
these really
on a human-
abstract
Well,
concepts
even
of
just on a
music
human level,
that
too,
he was
man.
developing. You
Yeah.
know, because this isn't simple stuff. You
Not in
know,
the
this
least.
isn't a 1-4-5.
This is it's not even anything.
It's
a
not
mode.
even anything.
It's
yeah.
a mode,
You
man.
know, it's about playing in and around more than it is playing on.
And I think that's what gives it that ethereal kind of effect. You know, is that the right word? I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
That effect that it's just almost like, I don't know. It's just like meditative. I don't
Well,
know.
yeah, it is very meditative, and I read an interesting thing where a lot of this, early when he was putting all this together, he was taking Gregorian chant,
Yeah, exactly.
which, you know, is like a drone,
It's a drone,
essentially.
exactly.
And that's where what the foundation was
The
for,
drone is
for
the
the
thing,
idea,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
were these Gregorian chants, which just kills me, because, you know, that's just,
It's about as outside as it gets.
yeah,
I mean, truthfully,
Yeah.
is the drone within inside of that thing? The drone is the template, and then all the stuff that's going on in the middle of it is that's where the thing happens. But it's the bed of that drone thing that makes it and just lifts it up. You know.
yeah, and it's like I said, it opens up so many
That's it.
pathways
To the
where
brain
you-
as well.
to the brain and to the ability
Spirit.
to be able to create music, because
Yeah.
you're not always having to worry about
You're not
where the
confi-
chord is.
You're not confined to the chord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and that's George Russell, you know, and again, this is a guy who was not only a theorist, but he was a composer, an arranger, a musician.
Fully formed. He's fully
I,
formed.
I would even call him an awakener,
that too.
because he
yes.
had the
That's the right
ability
word.
to awaken the genius
Mm-hmm.
within people, and that's a characteristic that you don't find in very many people.
Man, you're lucky if you meet. You don't. Well, most people don't even meet that guy in life.
Yeah,
Ever.
you meet a lot of people who you could call a teacher or an educator or a facilitator, but very rarely do you encounter someone who's an awakener.
That's right.
And that would be the
That's
word that I would use to describe George Russell.
Perfectly described. Yes.
You know, and again, this music wouldn't have existed without him, and I just don't think he gets his due when it comes to the music of Kind of Blue.
I never had heard of him, so until we did this research, and it's obvious the guy was he was the guy,
Yeah, he was the guy.
And the thing to be said about all these guys and this whole thing, man, they're all the guys,
Yeah.
for their, relative instruments and
Yeah.
what they created.
Yes, they are. So with that being said, let's move on to another guy who was a giant in the jazz world, and that's a gentleman by the name of Paul Chambers,
Mr. PC.
Mr. PC. And that's something that when you're immortalized by your peers
Yeah. It
and your
speaks volumes.
colleagues,
Yeah.
that in my opinion speaks volumes
It does.
that nothing else can speak. And this guy was immortalized by so many people.
It says a lot too, just not only as his bass prowess, as a human being for your fellow brothers of that craft or whatnot. They thought enough about you after he passed on to write songs.
Yeah, and I mean we're
About
talking
him.
about a lot of people. Red
Yeah.
Garland,
Yeah.
John Coltrane,
Jimmy Cobb,
Max
Yeah,
Roach,
Max Roach.
a lot of people.
Roy Haynes.
Created songs in memory of Paul Chambers because of the influence that he had on the music and the people.
I mean, he just had to have some sort of, juice down in him for him just to,
Yeah, and Paul Chambers was born Paul Lawrence Dunbar Chambers Jr.
The third.
Junior.
I
And
know.
he was born in 1955 in Pittsburgh, and
Might as well call him Maximilian.
and this is another guy who unfortunately did not live a very long life. I think he lived to be 33 years old.
Yeah, consumption, man. You got a lot of them.
Yeah, but the things that he did in that amount of time were pretty amazing.
He probably lived 10 lives in 33 years. Truthfully,
Yeah.
For the experiences he had.
That's how it makes me feel anyway when I look at my life and,
really,
and compare it to what this guy did in 33 years, And this was a guy that began playing tuba and baritone, which is they're both bass clef instruments.
They're bass clef, right.
So that's a good segue into playing the bass, which he did begin in 1949. And the weird part about that is if you look at traditional New Orleans music,
Absolutely.
it was always the tuba.
Absolutely,
that
still
was-
is.
Still is.
In the horn bands.
That was the
bass player.
The bass player.
He went from one cumbersome instrument to another. He went from the tuba to an upright
To
bass.
a double bass,
I
yeah.
know it. Man,
Can
you like to carry stuff.
Can you fit, outside of the Hammond B3,
I know.
he's pretty much got the
yeah.
load to carry.
I've done many of that in my life.
So he began playing bass in '49 and began his formal training in I think it was 1952. And
Yeah, he would have been 17, when he started his formal training.
yeah, joined his first band in high school, which was a band called the Four Sharps, and it was led by Mr. Kenny Burroughs.
I would have been the Four Flats. But, hey, who am I?
Yeah, and I read something really interesting about this guy because he graduated from a school, a high school called Detroit's Cass Tech High School, which at the time had an unsurpassed music program. And this,
They probably just didn't let anybody in there.
no, they didn't let anybody. And one of the weird things was that both of the bass players for Miles' first grade quintet both graduated from this school.
Yeah, it says a lot.
And there's a list of players, who all came through this school, So, again, here's another guy who shows this training and this education in the music that they're
They
Right.
obviously, yeah, they obviously. I'm not sure who the teacher was there, but he had to have been, pretty astute at what he did.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
had to have been.
Now, I spent a little bit of time reading about this high school just because it really intrigued me, especially in today's age.
That's
where-
why we love you, Andrew.
Where high school music is not really given much validity. Or
They're trying to get rid of it.
Outside of the marching band, so they can play, at the
Football games, at halftime.
So it's really when I come across a public school that was or is doing something, really deep
Yeah, that's something passionate in your heart.
in the
for that.
music. Yeah,
that's-
it is. So yeah.
He's an educator, people, if you don't know out there. So
Maybe part time anyway. So anyway, yeah, 1954, Mr. PC moved to New York City.
they'll say, if you're going to be in the entertainment industry, go to New York. If you can make it there, you make it anywhere,
Yeah.
and that's still true to this day.
That's true. I mean,
Yeah.
that's if it doesn't eat you up and spit you up,
That's right.
You'll come out.
You'll be the winner.
Yeah, you'll come out the winner. So a couple years after he moved to New York City in 1956, he was asked to join Miles' group, and he stayed with Miles for quite a few years.
Quite a
I
years,
think up
yeah.
until 1963.
Yep.
And I think one of
It's a long time, man.
That's a long time.
It is.
That's a long time. And I think one of the things that he became known for was, his style became what was considered the definition of swing.
Yeah, he swung, man. He had a swing to his thing. Some people, it's rigid. It doesn't swing. I think all great musicians, even in rock and roll, it ought to have a swing to it. I don't know so much anymore with computers doing it now, but the
Yeah,
musicians.
There's not much
I
swing in
mean,
the computers.
he's about as stiff and white as it can get. I mean, with a computer doing it.
Yes,
You
yeah,
know?
it is. And it sucks out all of the human aspects which make music
Yeah.
warm and real and accessible, in my opinion. But that's a topic for another day.
Anyway, I'll stop on
Yeah,
that.
you know, and so yeah, you know, he was known for his swing style, but he was also known for taking this music, this what was considered to be abstract in a way, and making it a little more tangible,
Accessible.
for the everyday listener
Exactly
who
right.
wasn't, you know, a jazz head or someone in that world.
Yeah, this record proves it too.
Yeah,
It does,
you know,
you know.
and so that was sort of what he was known for, was making this music.
Anything he touched swung.
Yeah,
You know,
he
I
made
mean,
it swing, and he made
Yeah.
people latch on to it.
That's right.
He made them get it, which is important, because if you put something that's too abstract out there,
Yeah. No,
it's just going to
over
go
your
over
head.
everybody's head.
And even the jazz lovers, I mean, there's gonna be some people that just get it because they think it's kind of, you know, I'm the cool guy because I really dig this, and really he doesn't have a clue what he's digging.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, you know. And then after his time with Miles, him and Wynton Kelly, who we'll talk about in a minute, they spent, I think, from '63 to '68
It's trio.
playing in Wynton Kelly's trio.
Yeah.
You know, which again was a
Bill Evans laid the template for that, the piano thing, you know, the template trio.
Yep, and that was definitely the model.
Yep.
You know, as Bill Evans.
He was the first one to do it.
trio.
Nobody did that
He
before.
was the first one to do it, and Wynton Kelly probably saw the benefits.
Yep. Three men,
and the
can eat.
success
We
that,
can eat,
that,
you know.
that they were having, and you know, him and Paul decided to put this trio together, and they did that for 5 or 6 years. Now, you know, here's the flip side, and you know, this is part of the reason why he was only with us for 33 years, is that he also struggled with the same thing that a lot of these other cats struggled with, which
Yep.
was alcohol and heroin.
Heroin, yeah.
You know,
Don't
and-
bump the needle.
Don't bump the needle. Yeah, and you know, that's the sad reality that we're facing when talking specifically about this era
Of course,
of
yeah.
jazz music.
It was almost like, you know, you had to do it. It was like a rite of passage almost, because, you know, from studying over the years, I think it's Charlie Parker that probably, you know, embedded that kind of mentality or that train of thought on the musician's mind to say, you got to be down in order to play the way I play.
Yeah,
And you didn't at all.
Yeah.
But, you know.
and this is a guy who went out on his shield, unfortunately, but not necessarily in a good way.
No.
You know, if you go back and listen to the last recording that he did with Wynton Kelly in that trio format in 1968, it's pretty obvious that
He's on his way out.
musical abilities are
Yeah,
on the
leaving.
decline.
Yeah.
And you know, this is all because of the alcohol and the heroin that he
Yeah.
was using.
Two downers, big time, man.
You know, and that same year that last album is recorded is the same year that he died.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, for a musician who's grew up his whole life making his way in music, and all of a sudden it's leaving him now because of his, you know, choices of using, you know, and that's not choices. You're an addict at that point, you know. And,
Yeah.
and instead of reaching out for help, you know, he just bows out.
Yeah, and essentially, you know, he was hospitalized in 1968,
Yeah.
where he fell into a coma, stayed in a coma for 18 days
Yeah,
before
18
he
days.
finally left us.
Yeah. It's sad. 33 is awfully young.
That's awfully young, you know, but again, here's a guy who did so much in that time, you know, recorded with Coltrane, recorded with Thelonious Monk,
All of them, man.
recorded with Wes Montgomery, you know, of
Mhm.
course the stuff that he did with Miles Davis, you know, and like we said at the beginning, you know, this is a guy who was memorialized by so many of
Mhm.
his colleagues and peers, and to me that speaks volumes for what he gave to the
Absolutely
music
right.
that he loved.
Honestly, that's the way to be memorialized or whatever for a musician. If your pals are tipping the hat to you about, you know,
Yeah.
that says it all.
That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. And yeah, so that's Paul Chambers, you know, and again, this is a guy that we could go on more and more about. But we're trying to keep this a little bit condensed here. So
And I'm trying to shut up more. So.
so that you guys don't get bored with what we're saying. You know, so we're gonna move on. And the next gentleman who
Still alive too. Only one.
Absolutely.
Only
You know,
one.
I think he's 91 years old at
I know,
this
man.
point.
He's still
And-
playing.
And he's still playing and he's still teaching.
Yeah,
You know,
man.
and to me, that is incredible.
He has a reason to get up in the morning.
That at 91 years of age, you still have enough passion for the music
Yep.
to not only one want to play it, but
Share it.
two want to share it.
That's right.
You know, and this is you know, the drummer, Mr. Jimmy Cobb. You
Jimmy
know,
Cobb's Mob, as we got group now.
Jimmy Cobb's mob, Mr. Wilbur James Cobb, born
Wilbur.
January 20th, 1929. And like Shane just said, he's still with us.
Yep.
He's 91 years old.
Man, if I live that long, I hope I'm still playing. I doubt I'm gonna live that long, but if I am, I shoot, yeah, man. I'm gonna play the day I die.
Well, you know, if something brings
Joy to yourself
beauty
and
and joy
people.
to your
Yeah,
life, you know, hang on to that.
I mean, it's
You know,
a
hang on
rare
to it.
thing in this life, in the world.
It is a rare thing, and,
Yeah.
and you know, that's one of the things that music, and not only music, but arts in general,
Arts in general, it's fulfilling.
you know,
It's fulfilling.
can do. They add a quality of life that very few things in this
Color.
world can
Everything.
add. You know, but this Mr. Cobb was born in Washington, D.C. You know, he got his first drum kit at the age of 13, which is a little late when you look at some of these other guys who were playing at ages 6 and 7 and,
It is actually.
and that sort of thing.
But it's still young enough to where he's a sponge. I think by the time he's about 15, 16, he kind of flips, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I think he's still kind of a sponge with that, you know. Right, he's on the cusp though.
Yeah, but and this is another thing that's different about him is that for the most part he was self-taught.
It's all self-taught, yeah.
You know, so you have all these other cats who spent time in this, you know, academic world and learning all this theory and stuff, and then all of a sudden you have this drummer who's
natural
essentially self-taught. You
Natural.
know, and I think that speaks volumes for his
abilities.
abilities.
Yeah, man.
And musicality.
Absolutely
you know, is
right.
that he just had it.
Yep.
And again, I'm not saying that
The
he
rest of them
didn't-
had it too, but they had also had opportunities to
yeah.
get the education.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I'm not saying that just because he had it, he didn't work. He still worked, but it
Turner and
was just
Skippy did. Probably
was
put in
just
more time than the rest of them.
a
honestly,
different
before
form
to catch up
of
to
a
it.
different form of learning,
Yeah.
I guess, is what Mr. Cobb was introduced to. You know, but here's a guy who began his professional career with Billie Holiday. So, you know, you're taking the self-taught drummer
Yeah, I
who
mean-
didn't start playing until the age of 13.
I mean, arguably the finest jazz singer of all time.
You know, who begins his professional career backing up the amazing Billie Holiday.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a lot to be said about that. You know, and again, another common theme. You know, at 21 years of age, where did he go?
New York
New
City.
York City. You know, that was the place to be.
Yep.
That was where you had to go if you wanted to make a name for yourself.
Especially at that time too, because the jazz scene was just blossoming. You know, in the 40s and even the 30s, even going back to that era. But definitely the 40s and early 50s. That was it was a very nurturing. A meeting of the minds and spirits up there, just it's going on. It's passing ideas, very much a poof,
Yeah.
you know, power kick.
And I've heard some people compare it to like a second coming of New Orleans.
Completely.
And there's a lot of
That's
argument,
good.
you know,
That's-
around
yeah.
this New Orleans jazz and this New York jazz and which is better and blah blah blah. And to me,
But
it's
you know-
not a better or worse.
No, but see the thing about New Orleans is all those cats are from there.
Yeah.
New York, they're all moving there.
Yeah.
There's a
yeah.
big difference.
They
there.
were going there for
Yeah,
the scene.
for the scene,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the New York cats didn't really care for what the New Orleans musicians
No,
were
I-
doing. You
yeah, I
know, and
get
sort
it.
of looked down their nose.
It wasn't as sophisticated as
Yeah.
far as their maybe the theory or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. And I think a lot of them, you know, ended up going back and finding that appreciation for their roots.
I mean, it's hard to argue with Satchmo. You know, he started the whole thing.
Yeah,
Really,
Yeah,
for Black America and White America, as far as the face,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. And you know, so yeah, he went to New York City at the age of 21, and I think in 1958, Mr. Miles Davis came knocking and asked him to join his band, which he did, and recorded a lot of stuff with Miles.
Yeah, he played on what was it, 9 albums? He
I
played
think
on?
it was 9 or 10 albums, and some of the more, you know, well-known ones, and some of the more well-known live albums as well. I know he was on the Carnegie Hall.
Think about that too. I mean, this I heard this quote when researching this. It said, I think it was Herbie Hancock that said that this album took it out of the jazz clubs and put it in the concert halls.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, they played maybe like the half note, maybe hold 60 people, and then they go to Carnegie Hall.
Yeah. Then they go to Carnegie Hall.
That's pretty amazing.
That's pretty amazing, and I know that he also played on Sketches of Spain, and of course, Kind of Blue, the album that we're talking about now. But he was also a very successful band leader, and I think recorded
still is
recorded 17 or 18 albums.
This album really propped up all these cats, man. It really did. If you think about the longevity of these guys' careers and the icons they all are,
Yeah.
It's this album that did it.
Yeah, and we're talking about how this album wouldn't exist without all of these guys, and it wouldn't. But the reality is it was a big feather in your cap at this particular point in time to play with Miles Davis.
On this record.
So,
I'm on a record sold 5 million copies. You know what I mean? Kind of hard to argue with you, bud. I got nothing.
Yeah, so that this was a guy who took that success and ran with it, and this was the thing that really blew me away. And again, going back to Paul Chambers and how being memorialized by your colleagues and peers is such a justification of your work.
Yeah.
When you look at the recording history of Jimmy Cobb, you will be blown away, because this man has recorded as a sideman on more than 100 albums.
It's mind-boggling.
I think it's somewhere closer to 130, if I'm not mistaken.
It's mind-boggling.
And when you look at the list of the people that he played with, it is absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, we're talking about Coltrane and Wynton Kelly and Dinah Washington and Dizzy Gillespie. Wayne Shorter.
His resume speaks for itself.
Wes Montgomery. The Adderley Brothers, and it goes on and on and on.
We could be here till it's time for tea this afternoon talking about it.
I think it's like,
it's
more than 100, and I think it's like 132, 133 albums that he recorded on as a sideman.
So amazing.
I mean, you're talking about.
He's 91. That's basically over an album a year of his life.
Yeah. You're talking about a man that has recorded on more than 160 albums. What a body of work.
That might be one of the biggest ever. It might be, man. I mean, I haven't researched that.
I haven't researched it either, but what a body of work, and what volumes it speaks about the
maybe
people.
Booker T and the MGs or something like that, maybe, because they, not only did they do their records, but they also did all everybody else's.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something that I'll look into.
I am too, actually. I'm curious.
But I just know that if you can record on more than 160 albums, both as a band leader
and
a sideman.
That says a lot that you're willing to be a team player.
That's a pretty successful career, and that's a lot of mailbox money.
He's still making it. Every 3 months, that check's coming in the mail. Yeah.
And I got to tip my hat and give him props for that, because the man took what was presented and ran with it.
And he obviously didn't get caught up in the drugs and alcohol game, because he wouldn't be alive today if he had it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's like we've said a couple of times, this man's still alive. He's still 90. He's 91 years old and still kicking, still playing. I think he recorded an album.
It's within the last year.
Last year or the year, within the past 2 years. And he's out here sharing it with the younger generation, which to me
keeping it alive
speaks volumes.
He gets it
of the man, and his attitude towards the work that he's done throughout his life. And
I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with him for like 30 minutes, man. Just pick his brain.
Yeah.
It's probably like sitting there talking to your grandfather or something, But he's got that. I'm sure he's just a congenial kind of guy. He's got to be.
Yeah. Well, I read an interesting interview, and it's got to be weird to be in the position he's in. This was an interview. It was all they were wanting to talk about was the recording process of Kind of Blue, and he's like, man, I don't remember it.
I know. I mean, think about it. 160 records.
Yeah, 160 records, and Kind of Blue was recorded. How many years ago now?
Almost 60.
Yeah.
Actually, he is 60. Yeah.
Of course, he doesn't remember a whole lot about it. And there was a funny anecdote where Miles apparently approached him during the recording process and said something about, well, why don't you do this on the drums? And he looked at Miles and said, Miles, let me play the drums. And,
Yeah.
and, you know, so they had that kind of rapport where
He could jab him back.
they could give it.
Yeah.
You know, they could give it and take
Two-way
it.
street.
And again, I think that
Says a lot about Miles too, because he took it.
says a lot about, well, you know, you
Yeah.
got to respect him. If you're going to
You're
drag
right.
a man in, you
I
got to
know.
respect a man's craft.
But yeah, exactly. But you know, Miles gets that. He gets portrayed as the you know the taskmaster, taskmaster or whatever.
Yeah, he does, and we'll talk about that in here in just a second with Wynton Kelly, because there's a lot of controversy around Wynton Kelly's place
And they're on the record.
on the record
Yeah.
and in the during the process. And yeah, so that's Jimmy Cobb.
I don't need you anymore, buddy.
That's Jimmy Cobb. And so yeah, the last person we're going to talk about today is Wynton Kelly, who is an amazing person. He only recorded on one track.
There's the blues, more the blues.
And they say that that's why Miles brought him in, because he wanted to have more of that blues feel. But here's the interesting part that I found intriguing, that throughout the entire recording process, Wynton Kelly was in
I'm sure.
the room.
Just hoping and praying that that Bill was just going to flub it.
You know, so here's-
so I'm there, man. You know,
Here's Miles sort of playing this game and this
Yep,
role
he's
of the
playing it- yeah,
taskmaster,
that's right, yeah,
where he's
man.
bringing in both
Yeah.
these keyboard piano players and sort of like dangling the carrot and say, look, if you don't cut the
Putting the heat on.
if you don't
Yep.
get the job done, I got my man right here who's just ready to,
At the control desk, just watching them. Just,
you know.
No,
So
just
it,
doing, you know.
it really interested me. You know, what was Miles' intent on having a second piano
he knew
player?
exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think he knew exactly what he was
Yeah.
doing too, and he was using it probably not only as a form of motivation, but a little bit of a form of intimidation.
Intimidation. Yeah.
And a little bit of
I got
I'm
control.
in control.
That's right.
I'm the boss.
That's right.
Which, you know, at this point in time, for a black man to even be the boss, you know,
That's the beauty about music.
particularly over a white man.
That's what I'm saying. It's a beautiful thing about
you
music.
know,
though.
was
We're on the
was
same level.
was a space that didn't really exist. You know, so we're talking about Wynton Kelly. You know, and he was known for his blues-based play.
He was more R&B. He was a little more accessible player than per se Bill Evans.
Yeah.
As far as on the layman ears.
Yes, yes, he was, and you know, Wynton Kelly was born in New York City, so he didn't have to
Yeah.
he didn't have to go to New York City. He was born in 1931, and again, did not live a long life.
He was about 40 years old.
I think
died.
he was 4. I think he died in 71. You know,
Yeah.
so he didn't live a long life as well. You know, but here was another guy who, I think, at the age of 12, he was already playing professionally. But his background was a little bit different, because, you know, at a very early age, he started playing in R&B bands.
Yep.
Which is where he picked up that more
That
blues
feeling.
style.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's all blues, really, at the base of it. That's the reason why Miles called it. He said it's kind of blue.
yeah, it's kind of blue and it's kind of not.
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know, and
but he
that's-
wanted to get back simpler on the
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I read that was really interesting about this album. And I think I included this in the first video, but I'll repeat it here too, that this album embodied the two things that are needed to create jazz, and that's improvisation and blues.
That's right. It's truth. That's it.
And, you know, without either one of those elements, the music that they
You
were
don't have
playing
anything.
wouldn't have existed.
Nope.
You know, and-
Blues is the root of all of it, though, man. It still is to this day.
Well,
Blues
a lot of people don't want to accept that.
Of
you know,
course they
because
don't.
Blues is uneducated music.
Of course,
you
to
know,
them
it's-
it is,
It's not
but,
bougie. It's not academic. It's not.
Buddy Guy says it the best. He says, if you hadn't had the blues, he said, just keep living.
Yeah.
And he's right.
But it really
Yeah.
is. It really is the foundation
Yep.
for what we know today is you know, particularly Western.
Oh yeah, but that's the problem. You know, it's the suits that dictate the whole thing, and I don't know. That's a problem with that mentality.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, here's this guy Wynton Kelly who, you know, was playing in R&B bands, and another common theme that you'll see in a lot of these players is the war. You know, in 1952,
Korea.
he was drafted into the Army and became Private First Class Wynton Kelly. Now here's the the really interesting part, and again, that he wasn't the only one who had this experience, but he became the
That's right.
musical director of the all-white Third Army Traveling Show.
Yep.
Now,
Coltrane did the same thing. basically.
Imagine what it was like to be a black man, in 1952,
Pay attention.
traveling with an all-white band.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
A military band
Yeah,
at
that's what I'm saying.
So I give him props for that. That's a big pair of shoes to step
Yeah, that's,
into.
and he had to go home after a lot of shows or sessions and whatnot, and have a lot of angst probably because
I'm sure.
he had to have, man.
I'm sure.
'Cause somebody's gonna give it to him.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was probably a rewarding experience and a learning
yeah.
experience, but I'm also sure that it probably, like you
Trying.
said, there was probably a lot of angst and a lot of anger and a lot of
Yeah.
frustration.
Yeah, a lot of tears
because he
when he closed the door.
He probably didn't get the respect
Obviously.
that a white man in that same position would
Obviously.
have gotten.
And it seemed like he didn't get respect through the career, his whole life either. If you think about it, just what we were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I don't know.
Yeah. But here's a guy who worked with
All the big names.
all the big names again. Dizzy Gillespie, Wes Montgomery, Charles Mingus, Art Blakey's
Dinah Washington.
Jazz Messengers. All of these guys.
Yeah.
And in 1959, he replaced Red Garland
Mm-hmm.
in a Miles Davis band, and did some recording with Miles and stayed with Miles, I think, up until 1963.
You think about that too. I mean, even after they recorded this record, you only played on one track, which is Freddie Freeloader.
Yeah.
But he stayed with Miles for another 4 years.
Yeah, and recorded.
It's got to be weird though, to a degree, on him, because it's got to be in the back of his mind throughout all those years, like,
Well, maybe he understood the vision.
Well,
maybe. I
hopefully.
don't know.
I don't either.
Ego can do strange things to you.
Yeah, darn right it can.
But maybe he understood the vision, and he did go on to record quite a few albums with Miles.
He did.
So I don't know if he was bitter about that or not.
Well, he had to have been to a degree, because here he is. He's watching somebody else steal his shine in the studio, and I'm sitting here watching him do it. And Miles is making me be here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
So here's what the really sad part to me about Wynton Kelly is that he had this success and he played with all kind of people, and he went on to be a band leader in his own trio,
Mm-hmm.
and played with some of the guys that we were talking about earlier, Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb, these fantastic musicians. And again, this is a guy who didn't live a very long.
And it wasn't because of consumption either.
A long life, but here's a guy who had done it all and seen it all, and as his career developed or failed to develop, I guess I should say, he struggled to find work.
Yeah, because he was known as, I'm sure he's probably known as the guy that couldn't cut the mustard on the Kind of Blue record. I mean, to a degree, I'm just putting it in simple terms, but
Yeah.
all right, so the one hand, you got all these other guys whose careers got lifted up. You got his, that's the guy who only played on one track, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's people's mindset. And so it actually hindered him from finding work.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what that does to the psyche, from going and playing with all of these great cats to, being in your mid-30s
Yeah,
and not being able to find work.
I know, sad.
It's sad. It's sad.
Because I didn't know the man personally, but I've never heard I didn't read any bad stories about it. But
No.
it's obvious it was a mindset
On the community and the people who
Street
made it
pullers,
up, and probably the critics probably had something to do with it. And
Of course they do. The critics have everything to do with it.
the people on the outside who make the decisions probably had something to do with it. But I think it's really a real travesty that you have this guy who
It's a part of the record, but
who did so much.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
still, as he ended his career, couldn't find work.
no.
And unfortunately, Wynton Kelly suffered from epilepsy throughout his
Yeah.
career.
His whole life, it sounds like, as a child.
Yeah, his whole life, and that was what took him from
Seizure.
us. At 39 years of age, he was up in Canada and had an epileptic seizure, and
sad, man.
that was it, and here's
So children, if you want to be a jazz or blues musician, wrap yourself in bubble wrap.
Yeah.
Because it's such a tragic story for all these people
yeah,
throughout
and
history.
if only that would prevent the inevitable.
I know, but
But
it seems to be though.
well, it's definitely a common theme, and not just in blues and jazz, but
Art
in the
world,
rock
period.
world and
Even art.
in art and period, the true greats often seem to be taken way too soon.
Yeah,
And
I don't know.
maybe that's the price you pay. I don't know.
And I guess maybe they did their work. The work they were here to do.
And they did do their work.
Yeah.
All of these guys that left us early that we've been talking about in this particular series of videos. Again, they were giants, and the footprint that they left
Still are.
was huge, and is still as impactful today as it was when Kind of Blue was released in 1959.
Yep.
And that's Wynton Kelly. And I think we're going to wrap this up here. Come back. This is part 3. We've got part 4 coming up soon, where we're going to focus on the man himself, Mr. Miles Davis, and we're going to talk about the influence of this album a little bit.
Miles, man.
Because it is a hugely influential album, not only to jazz musicians, but to musicians
Everybody.
in all genres of music.
I think if people would listen to this record once a week, they would be a lot more happy, a lot less stressful.
Yeah, and I think it was Quincy Jones that said, "This music is like my orange juice. It's every day."
Every day, baby.
So
That's a good quote.
hit play on Kind of Blue for 5 minutes of your day.
Yeah.
I guarantee it'll change your outlook on the world that you're living in.
We are what we eat.
We are what we eat. That's all for today, folks. This is Don't Bump the Needle, live from the shed in Spartanburg County. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so we can keep this thing going. We'll see you guys soon for episode 4 of 4 of Don't Bump the Needle with Miles Davis, Kind of Blue.
Peace, y'all.